Hi everyone. First of all, I would like to thank to the organizers of this Congress for getting us together. I'm very happy to be with you today. With Hale, we will be talking about cognition and perception in psychotic disorders. We will be talking about newly heard concepts in this very field. I will be talking about visual perception changes in psychiatric disorders, and I will be talking about potential clinical practices. As the psychiatrists, we are not very knowledgeable about the visual system. Therefore, let me talk about the organization of the visual system. I will continue with visual perceptual changes in psychosis, and potential clinical applications is the third topic I will be focusing on. When you look at this image, there is cognitive representation of this image, and while it's being happening, not all characteristics of this picture are examined in the same place of the brain. If there is an association, it's being combined together. We are not knowledgeable about this fact. The information comes from different pathways, and these separate characteristics come from different pathways. But the other details, for example, the surface traits and its relationship with the surrounding objects, whether there is movement, whether there is biological information, any phase, all of them are being evaluated in a detailed manner. This is in Art Museum of Dallas, and it's a huge painting. I recommend you to see it. Why visual system? Those who can see healthily, 90% of external world representation happens through visual system, and it is normal that it has a wide area in the cortex, in the neocortex. 30% of neocortex is being fed by visual system. Visual science is a field which has been examined in a detailed manner for so many years by the psychologists, and it has been defined very well. The relationship between the function and anatomy is well known. An image falls in the retina, and it goes lateral gyneconucleus, and in the center of occipital cortex, it reaches up to primary visual cortex. And there are two pathways, the first one of which is dorsal pathway. The rough framework of the visual object is being perceived by this dorsal pathway, and it sends that information to prefrontal cortex. And the other pathway is the ventral pathway, and it looks at the details, fine details. And ventral pathway works in a slower manner. And what happens in schizophrenia? Georginus is maybe one of the most famous painters of the United States. This drawing is an early period of him. You can see that the limits of the objects are quite clear, and this picture has a good organization. The lights has been used very well, and contrast is high. But George Inness is known to have experienced a psychological process, and this is another drawing he made in the later years of his career. Here you can't see the limits of the objects well, and there are some objects that you can't tell for sure. This is a summer drawing, summer picture, but in the middle you can see here two trees in the middle of other trees. The organization is not that well and it's hard to understand. The difference of two drawings of George Inness can be explained by the changes in his psychological situation or psychotic process, Visual perception changes in the psychotic disorders. Incomplete perception of very briefly exposed stimuli among dementia precox patients, Kraepelin stated that. This is what he states. On top of that, Bleuler couldn't repeat this observation. He stated that Kraepelin is wrong. Sensory and perceptual functioning is normal in schizophrenia. Of course, Bleuler is not only person to blame. Why visual deficits have not been recognized as a core dysfunction in schizophrenia long ago? First of all, the patient is not aware of these changes because they're hard to notice, and the clinicians can't notice these changes without measurement devices, and these changes are related to the attention problems or motivation problems. And another reason that's worth mentioning is that schizophrenia researchers stated dopamine hypothesis for so many years, and visual system is not a system which is rich in dopamine. Therefore, the researchers neglected this part. What kind of visual symptoms do we see in psychosis? If we ask these symptoms to the patients, they can report them. There is a bone scale, and one subsegment of bone scale is about visual changes. If we ask these questions, we can get the answers. Unclear sight, momentary blindness, or partial vision. These might be the visual symptoms in psychosis. Or photopsia. The contours cannot be perceived by the patient. And how are they factored to the clinical practice? These are the sentences said by the patients. Whenever I want to focus an object, it disappears before my eyes. Or, since I'm ill, my vision is handicapped. When somebody shows me his whole hand, I can see only the upper part of the last 3 fingers. Or, things seemed so far away, everything was in a distance. These are quite rich clinical presentations. Visual perceptual impairments in psychosis. When we look at them, I just mentioned, separately processed characteristics like the shape, speed, etc. In many of them, there's impairment in schizophrenia. I'm not going to focusing on all of them, but I will be giving you some examples. Spatial frequency processing. This is a visual function. Here, we see that dark and light transitions are quite frequent. It's high frequency, and in the other one, it's not that clear, and it's called as low frequency. When you look at the patients with schizophrenia, especially, low frequency images are hard to be differentiated. And low frequency images are being perceived by dorsal pathway. Therefore, they are resulting from the disruption in dorsal pathway. A study has been conducted in that regard, how the stimuli is being perceived by the schizophrenic patients. There is one face with high resolution. You can notice all the details, and in the second picture it has low spatial frequency and you can't see the fine details. And with low spatial frequency, the patients perceive this picture which is full of fear. And there is another study, it's contrast perception impairment in the schizophrenic patients. When they see two things in close contrast, schizophrenic patients have difficulty in differentiating the two. In this study, on the left part, it's 4-degree contrast, and the same face expression in different contrasts are being shown to the schizophrenic patients. Healthy patients can see and understand the expression at 4%, but the schizophrenic patients can only understand the facial expression in 8% of contrast. Therefore, schizophrenic patients perceive differently when they can't see it clearly. And this is another interesting topic. Very common finding is that schizophrenic patients have difficulty in context processing. When you look at this picture, the contrast in the middle, which one is close to the options on the left, I can see that it's similar to 20% contrast. But when you take the surrounding of that center, there was an illusion, by the way. I noticed that it's similar to the one of 30%. The schizophrenic patients, when they have a look at them, they have less predisposition to this illusion. They can see the middle contrast when compared to healthy patients because they have difficulty in combining or contexting the middle stimuli and the surrounding stimuli. And this is another impairment, perceptual organization. They do have difficulty in understanding perceptual organization of the dots. Here, for example, on the left, there is an egg, for example. You can see that. On the right-hand side, they're not in order, but still egg. In this 7-degree picture on the right-hand side, schizophrenic patients have more difficulty in perceiving that egg shape in schizophrenic patients, In schizophrenia, there are many other cognitive tests, but most of them are correlated to one another. And Jolvi test, let's say egg test, is not correlated to the other disorders in other cognitive fields. Another field is motion perception and speed discrimination. When we show them two images moving in different speeds, schizophrenic patients have difficulty in understanding them. What is the clinical reflection of that? Biological movement, biological motion. What I mean by saying biological motion, the motion of a biological thing and non-biological thing are perceived by different fields of the brain. These are two different functions of the brain. We measure it like this, walking man, you see here. It's easy to perceive them. We are asking which way this walking man is heading to. But in the real world, we don't perceive any stimuli alone because there are always other stimuli around. How we measure it? We put random dots around the walking man and we still ask the same question, which way the walking man is heading towards, we noticed that schizophrenic patients have difficulty in understanding which way it's headed to. They show different performance, and biological and non-biological motions can not be easily differentiated by schizophrenic patients, and the performances of schizophrenic patients in this test is correlated to the empathy scores. How can we use them potentially in our daily practice? Why can it have potential clinical use? Visual perception impairments are different when you compare it with the other fields, because it might demonstrate deficits in specific circuits, and we are very knowledgeable about the visual system, therefore it can set a very good example for us. And these tests are quite cheap. You can do it with a computer, and you can measure many visual functions very easily, and you don't need a special equipment for that, and you don't need very trained personnel. Long educations are avoided, and there is a growing evidence which indicates its potential as outcome predictor at high-risk populations. We know that clinical psychosis appearance might be predicted by these changes. So how to translate them into clinical practice? One of the most important reasons why it has not been used that commonly is that people don't have practical, easily applicable, validated task batteries, because they don't have any clinical batteries that can use it. And these changes will be characterized in a better manner if we can have such a battery, and we can see the relationship of these impairments with the predispositions, and we can understand the prognostic values. What have we done? Our first target is to develop a visual task battery, and while doing so, our purpose was to evaluate different levels of visual processing stream at early and at higher functions. And also we wanted to check dorsal and ventral pathways. Dorsal is what, and ventral where systems. And we wanted to have practical applicability in various clinical settings. And we didn't include any tests requiring spatial equipment. We just added the tests which can be conducted just with computer. It's brief, but it collects sufficient amount of data for reliable measurements. When we want to repeat such studies, even for one function, we need to be collecting lots of data. Can we have the same results by collecting brief data? By considering the conditions of the psychometric tests, we wanted to prepare the shortest test. Which tests did we use? Early visual processes. We used visual spatial working memory, and also early visual processing. And in the middle temporal region, speed discrimination task was used. And another function which is higher is the visual spatial working memory. And we didn't check them only at the clinical symptom severity spectrum. We also looked at the relationship of these two in healthy patients as well. A is the speed test, speed perception test, we showed two radials and we conducted a test and we calculated the score. And the second test is about visual spatial working memory test stimuli, and we showed them three different patterns and we asked for the different one, and we continued to ask about more images as they give the right answer. Third test was an interesting one. Schizophrenic patients are quite sensitive, not sensitive to illusion. There was some data about that, but those tests were conducted by geometric images, but we wanted to use more natural images and we wanted to see the results. And here in a hole you see the balls in the front and behind. They do have the same dimension, they are the same ball, but their locations are different, and the one in the front is being perceived smaller and the other one at the behind is perceived bigger. We showed them these balls and we wanted them to equalize on the images on the right. And the other one, the last one, is the Jovi test, the egg test I just mentioned. It's very difficult for you to see because we used them in the first practical sessions in D1, but in D2 there is an egg actually. And the sticky point, which one is it? And these are the results. Visual spatial working memory. You can see here the difference. And in counter integration tests, previous studies were collecting more data, having same result, but we collected less data and had the same result. And in speed discrimination test, again the same thing. We collected less data and we could have the same result. And this one is visual context processing, size perception test. The results were different than we expected. Both schizophrenic and healthy patients were caught by delusion, and two groups perceived that the ball was perceived smaller when it is in the front, but there wasn't any significant difference between the groups. And in the backward masking, you show them an image for a very short period of time. When you show it alone, it can be perceived, but when there is a mask just at the back, it is not perceived. But I think we failed to mask the backward. What about clinical symptoms and their correlation? Every three tests that we showed differences, they are correlated to negative symptoms. And in healthy individuals, we check the schizophilic situations. You can see here the differences. In healthy people, negative schizotypal characteristics, visual perception functions do have negative negative spectrum. It's correlated to them. To summarize, abnormalities at multiple levels of the visual processing have been shown in the same single group of patients, and we were able to demonstrate them in shorter tasks, and in many clinical settings you can conduct them in 15 minutes. It's not only about the severity of the disease, it is also related to the predisposition to the disease. Other vision-related biomarkers. What are those? What are the biomarkers? Eye movements. I'm not going to give any details about them. And the other one is EEG, Visual Steady State ERP. There are some EEG markers and also neuroimaging markers. I will just talk about eye movements, and I will be giving you some results of these analyses. I'm working on my expertise at the university, and I can assist Dr. Ivleva as well, Taminga as well. And this is psychosis dimensions. When we look at the psychosis dimensions sample, this is a consortium B-SNP, and this is taken from many modalities: EEG, eye tracking, and cognition. And there are some other modalities, but one of the main results of the study is to create biotypes, but EEG, eye tracking, and cognition are being used to have biotypes. We have such data, and we ask two questions. Does the clinical distinction of familial versus sporadic disease have biological correlation? Because we use it very commonly in clinical practice, whether the patient has a family history or not. We say that it's genetically predisposed. It might be sporadic, or environmental conditions might have an effect on that. And second question, which biotype factors are indicative of familial vulnerability? Which biotype factors are indicative of familial vulnerability? You can see here the EEG, eye movement, and cognition measurements have been made, and those correlating with one another, they are combined, and 9 different factors are being created.
We use 3 groups to answer the question in our mind. First one is the first-degree relatives of familial patients, and the second one, first-degree relatives of sporadic patients, and third is normal controls. So, if there is a biologic counterpart for the family and sporadic group, then the first-degree relatives of the sporadic and the family group are expected to be closer to the normal group. So, only in 2 factors we found differences between these 3 groups. One of them was bugs, a general cognition assessment, and the other one is an anti-saccade error. It's a visual task error. So we show a random image in one of the 4 quadrants. The person is told to look at the opposite quadrant, not the one with the image. The errors made by the person during this process are called anti-saccade error. What about the postdocs? Maybe the cognition results were closer to what we expected. The cognition scores of familial ones completely different from healthy individuals, but indeed between the cognition scores of first-degree relatives of sporadic and familial groups, we did not find any significant difference. And also we saw that biologically speaking, there was no difference between these groups. So this clinical distinction of ours is not explained biologically, so maybe there could be some kind of a familial predisposition. We also had polygenic risk scores as well. We checked the relationship between biotype factors and polygenic risk scores. We used patients' relatives, and normal controls. We found correlation in this comparison in the box cognition score and the anti-saccade error score. And this suggests the following questions. Using biomarker profiles of patients' first-degree relatives as indicators of familial vulnerability in high-risk populations. Maybe we should check the biomarker profiles of patients' relatives, and especially using the eye movements errors. Maybe we can increase the sensitivity and specificity of the risk measurement tools. What about future directions? What's awaiting us in this field, or what to do in order to open new clinical use fields for this? Well, we don't know anything as to whether there is a causality relationship, but we know that they are emerging in the earlier stages of life. We need to understand whether they have effects on real-world functioning, and also we need to understand the vulnerability to psychosis. And it would be good to know if it has predictive value for clinical outcomes. So we need to define better the risk conversion and also response to treatment. And as you heard in Dr. Taminga's study as well, in the biomarker batteries, can these visual changes find a place? Because these tests are more affordable, so they can be used more commonly. And maybe are we going to be seeing visual tests as a fourth test? Another point is, can these deficits be treated? Can visual perception trainings slow down conversion to psychosis in the earlier stage? Thank you very much for your attention. I shared my results, which I took also from Dost Öngür, so I would like to thank his team, and there are other researchers at other universities with whom we cooperated. I would like to thank Dr. Taminga's team and also the entire BSNP consortium as well. Thank you.